Today we're reading from Srila Prabhupada Lilamrita, Volume 1, written by His Holiness Satsvarup Das Goswami, the biography of Srila Prabhupada. We're on the 4th chapter, entitled, How Shall I Serve You? So Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati has decided to make the Brajmando Parikrama. There are several Brajmando Parikramas taken out by different sampradayas, Nimbarka Sampradaya, Vallabha Sampradaya. And now, following in the footsteps of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati in 1932 organized the Brajmando Parikrama, which was going to take 1 month, just as we do. We're following in the footsteps of Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati with our Brajmando Parikrama, who was following in the direct footsteps that Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu took when the Sanodiya Brahman, disciple of Madhavendra Puri, took him through the 12 forests of Vrindavan. So Srila Prabhupada at that time was living in Allahabad, associating with the devotees who had come from Calcutta to establish a Rupa Gaudiya Math in Prayag. This was just, the Kumbh Mela was in 1930, and according to, although it's not mentioned in the Lilamrita, according to what Srila Prabhupada says, and the biography of Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati, he came to that Kumbh Mela, and we have a picture also of Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati at Prayag, which we'll see later. Abai arrived in Mathura by train from Allahabad and approached Kosi by rickshaw. The party had been now traveling for 20 days from Mathura to Madhuvan to Talavan, Govardhan, Barsana, Nandagaon. And then from Nandagaon, they walked the 8 kilometers to Kosi. So on that day, Srila Prabhupada, he inquired from the devotees in Allahabad where the party would be. So he took a train to Mathura. In those days, the trains, the British had made all of the train routes to the big cities, so Mathura was considered a major city. And then from Mathura, the countryside was full of charm for Abai. Instead of factories and large buildings, there were mostly forests, and aside from the main paved road on which he traveled, there were only dirt roads and soft sandy lanes. As a Vaishnava, Abai felt sensations an ordinary man wouldn't. Now and then he sighted a peacock in the field, its exotic plumage proclaiming the glories of Vrindavan and Krishna. Even a non-devotee, however, could appreciate the many varieties of birds, their interesting cries and songs filling the air. Occasionally, a tree would be filled with madly chirping sparrows, making their urgent twilight clamor before resting for the night. Even one unaware of the special significance of Vrindavan could feel a relief of mind in this simple countryside where people build fires from cow manure fuel and cook their evening meals in the open, their fires adding rich, natural smells to the indefinable mixture which was the odor of the earth. There were many gnarled old trees and colorful stretches of flowers, bushes of bright violet camellia, trees abloom with delicate white parijat blossoms, and big yellow kadamba flowers, rarely seen outside of Vrindavan. Now, this particular route that Srila Prabhupada took, Mathura is 45 kilometers south of Kosi, and there's the highway. Now, this highway is so ancient that this is also the route that Krishna took when he came to see the Pandavas when they lived in Kamyavan. So at least from the time of Mahabharata, in those days, what we now call National Highway 2, NH2, and what the British called the Grand Trunk Road, in Krishna's time it was called Uttarpad. And this road starts in Greece. The Greeks made this road from Greece to Afghanistan, to Pakistan, into India, straight down India, over to Calcutta, going all the way to Chittagong, and then on to Burma. This is what connected Europe to Asia, this road. And this one segment, now the 84 crores, or the 164 area of Braj, that falls within this road that passes right through it. Nowadays it goes, Braj itself, there's Haryana, there's UP, there's Rajasthan. All of these states contain the Leela grounds of Sri Krishna. So Srila Prabhupada, having arrived in Mathura, he found his way to Kosi. Here, on the road, there was lively horse-drawn Tanga traffic. The month of Kartik, October-November, was one of the several times of the year that drew many pilgrims to Vrindavan. The one-horse Tangas carried large families, some coming from hundreds of miles away. Larger bands of pilgrims, grouped by village, walked together. The women dressed in bright-colored saris, brown-skinned men and women sometimes singing bhajans, carrying but a few simple possessions as they headed for the town of thousands of temples, Vrindavan. And there were businessmen like Abai, dressed more formally, coming from a city, maybe to spend the weekend. Most of them had at least some semblance of a religious motive: to see Krishna in the temple, to bathe in the holy Jamuna River, to visit the sites where Lord Krishna had performed his pastimes, such as the lifting of Govardhan Hill, the killing of Keshi demon, or the dancing in the evening with the gopis. So when Krishna left Vrindavan, Akrura, we know, took him on his chariot. And Akrura, you see there's a side road also, and that's called Akrura Gaman. And if you go to the roof of the Nanda Bhavan in Nandagaon, you'll see a straight road going. And that straight road is the path that Akrura took. He did not take this main road, the Uttarpad, because he didn't want the Brijbasis to follow. And then, rather than taking the main road, he went along the old Mathura path, and that's where Akruragat is. So this road, when Krishna finally reached Mathura, and he was feeling intense separation from the Brijbasis, he decided to send Uddhava back for the first time, because none of the Mathuravasis had darshan of Vrindavan. And he told Uddhava which path to take. It was this path. And he told him the trees, the flowers, the places of pastimes. If you go this way, you'll see where I had this pastime, that pastime. You'll see all of the devotees, how they're longing for me. And then finally you'll reach Nandagaon. So this road is so holy that we go on between Delhi and Mathura. Krishna himself, Krishna's devotees, all of these great personalities use this road for enacting Krishna's pastimes. And that's why you'll see on the road from Mathura, Vrindavan, and then finally to Kosi, all little villages. And these villages are the places of Krishna's pastimes. Now the names are changed. Like we have Chomu. So Chomu, that's Chaturmukha. That's where Lord Brahma, after he became bewildered by Krishna, offered his respects to Krishna. There in the forest, there's a small temple. Then you go further and there's Nadi Shemari. So previously that was called Shamsaki. And Nadi is when Krishna dressed up as a woman and came there for that pastime when Radharani was angry. And there's a famous Durga temple there where they just had big Navaratri festival there for Durga Devi. So all of these small villages where these village people live that Satsvarup Maharaj is describing, these are all Krishna's pastime places. And when we go on the Braj Mando Parikrama, these places and the pastimes come to life by the speaker. So Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati, he explained the purpose of the Braj Mando Parikrama that he was beginning. And that is not for sightseeing. The purpose of Braj Mando Parikrama, and when we go to see these places of pastimes, is to hear from the speaker. Because by hearing, we can understand not only the pastime, but we can understand the glories of Krishna and his exchange of love with the devotees. So Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati, he spoke on these wonderful topics every evening. So far as the birds and the trees are concerned, Satsvarup Maharaj, in order to not make the book too big, because it was already going to be 7 volumes, we just received from him a full set of his books that he's written. And in those books, they're now in the library. We have a whole shelf of his books. It might be 30 books. He has such beautiful poetry about all of these in very short form that he's describing here, but in beautiful poetic form, also in prose, of the beauties of Vrindavan. His experiences, because he was here with Srila Prabhupada as his servant, and his own realizations when he entered Braj and remembered Srila Prabhupada's pastimes here. So if any of you want to understand more deeply the beauty of Vrindavan and these wonderful pastimes and how Satsvarup Maharaj was able to explain this so artistically, you can read his further books that go more deeply into Prabhupada's excursions here, his exchanges with the devotees, and even these particular pastimes. Abai was sensitive to the atmosphere of Vrindavan, and he noted the activity along the road. But more than that, he cherished with anticipation the fulfillment of his journey, his meeting again after a long separation, the saintly person he had always thought of within himself, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati, who had spoken to him in Calcutta and had convinced him of Lord Chaitanya's mission to preach Krishna consciousness. Abai would soon see him again, and this purpose filled his mind. Now, when Srila Prabhupada, again following the footsteps of his spiritual master, returned to India with 40 disciples to travel all over India, which is exactly what Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati did after he established his headquarters in Calcutta. He took 40 devotees and traveled all over India and started to make temples all over India. So Srila Prabhupada did the same thing. After he has established his headquarters in Los Angeles and had made about 45 temples by then, he came back to India. And as he was traveling, he visited Gorakhpur. Now, we all know Gorakhpur is the place of Gita Press. And that is where Hanuman Prasad Podar, he has his whole, we have the Gita Press, we can see the books here. He has his whole works going on. So Srila Prabhupada had a relationship with Hanuman Prasad Podar. Actually, it was he who gave partial funds to print Prabhupada's first volume of Srimad Bhagavatam. So he visited Prabhupada took the devotees to Gorakhpur, and on the day of Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati's appearance day, he was reminiscing this time when he came here to see Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati. And he explained there in that class that day that actually when he met Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati in 1922 for the first time, he was initiated at that time because his words went into his heart. And he was, since that time, he was always meditating. How will I be able to fulfill this mission that Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati has imparted to me? Because he said that actually, in that first meeting on the rooftop, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati singled him out, that you are an educated young man. Why don't you preach this message of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu all over the world in English? So since then, he said, since then actually, I was initiated, but only formally. And then Prabhupada mixed up the dates. So last week, you forgive me please, those of you who are here, the dates were mixed up because what Satsrup Maharaj has researched with all of his assistants, and then there's a biographies also of Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati. So in those biographies, it says that he went to Prayag in 1930, 1931, and then finally in 1932. Srila Prabhupada, he says that he was initiated in 1933 officially, when he received double initiation. So the time, we will of course accept the date that Srila Prabhupada gave, 1933. But there were different times when Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati apparently also visited Prayag before Prabhupada's initiation. Upon reaching the lantern-illuminated camp of the Gaudiya Math, you can show the pictures, and inquiring at the registration post, he was allowed to join the Parikrama village. He was assigned to a tent of Grihastha men and was offered prasadam. The people were friendly and in good spirits, and Abai talked of his activities with the Math members in Calcutta and Allahabad. So Prabhupada already had friends amongst the Math members, and he saw them there at the Brajmandal Parikrama, was happy to see them, was speaking to them. And many of them who later became sannyasis, Prabhupada, he would have them sometimes stay at his house, and he would help them, like Atulananda Brahmachari, who was the president. And then here we have the Keshav Gaudiya Math, Bhakti Pragya Keshav Maharaj, who gave Srila Prabhupada sannyas later in 1959. At that time, he was a brahmachari, and sometimes he would stay right in Srila Prabhupada's house. So he knew many of the members who, when he arrived at the camp, he recognized them. Then there was a gathering. A sannyasi was making an announcement. This evening, he said, there would be a scheduled visit to a nearby temple to see the deity of Sheshashayi Vishnu. Some of the pilgrims cheered, Hari Bol, Hare Krishna. The sannyasi also announced that His Divine Grace, Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, would speak that evening for the last time and would be leaving the parikrama party the next day. So there was a choice of going on the parikrama or staying for the lecture. Now we have Srila Prabhupada describing this. So I met them in Kosi, and Keshav Maharaj was informing that Srila Bhaktisiddhanta is going to Mathura tomorrow morning, and he will speak Harikatha this evening. Anyone who wants to may remain. or otherwise they may go to see Sheshashayi Vishnu. So at that time, I think only 10 or 12 men remained. Sridhar Maharaj, and we'll hear more about Sridhar Maharaj later, was one of them. And I thought it wise. What can I see at this Sheshashayi? Let me hear what Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati will speak. Let me hear. When Abai arrived, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta was already speaking. He sat with his back erect and a shawl around his shoulders, not speaking like a professional lecturer giving a scheduled performance, but addressing a small gathering in his room. At last, Abai was in his presence again. Abai marveled to see and hear him, this unique soul possessed of Krishna Katha, speaking uninterruptedly about Krishna in his deep, low voice, in ecstasy and deep knowledge. Abai sat and heard with rapt attention. Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati had been speaking regularly about Sambandha, Abhideya, and Prayojana. So at this, during this Brajmandu Parikrama, these daily lectures, so there were different sannyasis assisting Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati. For instance, Ban Maharaj, he was in charge of setting up the camps, the tents. He was the forward party that would go ahead. And then, because they didn't have trucks and lorries and tempos in those days, they had camels. And they would take all the tents and all the cooking utensils and put them on the backs of the camels and take them from place to place. And there would be sannyasis. When the pilgrims would come to each holy place, the sannyasis would tell the different leelas at that place. And then in the evening, Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati would speak. And he chose to speak of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's Sanatan Siksha. And those were the teachings in the Madhya Leela, chapter 20 to 22, that Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu instructed Sanatan Goswami on Sambandha, Abhideya, and Prayojana. Sambandha is the stage of devotional service in which awareness of God is awakened. Abhideya is rendering loving service to the Lord, and Prayojana is the ultimate goal, pure love of God. He stressed that his explanations were an exact recapitulation of what had originally been spoken by Krishna and passed down through disciplic succession. Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati's particular utterance, mostly Bengali but sometimes English, with frequent quoting of Sanskrit from the Shastras, was deep with erudition. It is Krishna, said Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati, who is the only Superlord over the entire universe and beyond it, of Vaikuntha, the transcendental region. As such, no one can raise any obstacle against his enjoyment. Now, there were some contentious issues. Last week we ended the class of describing how when Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati brought his party to Vrindavan, the Goswamis closed the doors of the temples and the shopkeepers closed their businesses and wouldn't sell anything to the pilgrims on the Padayatra. Now, this was a contentious issue because Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati was giving initiation, Brahmin initiation, to people who were not born in the Brahmin community. So this was one contentious issue. Now we're going to hear about another contentious issue that Satsvarupa Maharaj did not go into detail, but this was the reason why Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati was speaking on this topic of Sambandha, Abhideya, and Prayojana. Because Sambandha, we understand, we all have an eternal relationship with Krishna. Prayojana we understand to be love of Krishna. It is the abhideya that there are many different opinions. And here in Vrindavan, we had the Babajis, and we have the Jati Gosais. The Jati Gosais means the Goswamis in charge of the temples. Now the Babajis had something called Siddha Pranali. And Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati was opposed to the giving of Siddha Pranali to immature devotees. But what the Babajis do is they give it to a new devotee. And Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati, he said, this is like force feeding. Because in Siddha Pranali, you're told your 11 aspects of your eternal relationship in the Prayojana, in your love of Krishna, love for Krishna. You're told your age, your name, what you look like, where you live, what your service is, all these different aspects of your eternal Siddha Sarup. So Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati said, you cannot force feed these things. These realizations come by the pure chanting of the holy name. And they come from within. They're not pushed upon you by the Guru. The Guru simply encourages you and gives you guidance once you get these realizations by the pure chanting of Hare Krishna. Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati gave an example that if you have a small 5-year-old child and you begin to explain to the 5-year-old child about the mature, intimate dealings between a man and a woman, what can a small child understand? He doesn't have the maturity, both mentally, emotionally, or physically, to understand these things. So with neophyte devotees, and Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati considered all of us to be neophyte, how can you give the Siddha Pranali when they don't have the realization and the development in their chanting of Hare Krishna? So this was the contentious issue between the Abhideya. So Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati, he was teaching sadhana bhakti as we have it in our ISKCON, because it's all coming from Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati's teachings, what we're practicing in our ISKCON temples. This was one contentious thing. So he was very, very simply explaining, what is Sambandh? How do we finally come to the stage of realization of our relationship with Krishna? How that relationship is developed by our sadhana bhakti that eventually matures into Raganuga bhakti. And from that Raganuga bhakti, we come to the stage of Prayojana. And this is what Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati was speaking about that night. An hour went by, 2 hours. The already small gathering in Srila Bhaktisiddhanta's room gradually thinned. A few sannyasis left. You can go to the next. Excusing themselves to tend the duties connected with the parikrama camp. I guess you can't see these so well because of the lights. These are pictures of the parikrama, the camp, and a group picture that was taken. Only a few intimate leaders remained. Abai was the only outsider. Of course, he was a devotee, not an outsider. But in the sense that he was not a sannyasi, was not handling any duties, was not even initiated, and was not traveling with the parikrama, but had joined only for a day. In that sense, he was an outsider. The philosophy Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati was speaking, however, was democratically open to whoever would give an ardent hearing, and that Abai was doing. So, here he says, he was listening with wonder. Sometimes he would not even understand something, but he would go on listening intently, submissively, his intelligence drinking in the words. He felt Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati revealing to him the direct vision of the spiritual world. Just as a person reveals something by opening a door or pushing aside a curtain. Now, Srila Prabhupada got this phrase. He called, when Prabhupada, you see, when Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati wrote his books, you won't find any illustrations in the books, and you especially won't find any paintings or pictures on the covers of his books. You can see in Prabhupada's house the Srimad Bhagavatams that Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati printed. It's just a plain cover. But Srila Prabhupada, understanding his audience, he had his devotees paint beautiful paintings describing the pastimes of the Lord, that he personally instructed them how to paint. Every detail, their colors of each personality, what they wore, how old they were, everything. And he called these windows to the spiritual world. And he even went so far, you'll see in Prabhupada's original Srimad Bhagavatams, it's just a brick color on the inside. But he made a jacket cover, that he completely designed himself, of a map of the spiritual world. So where did he learn all of these things? By listening to his spiritual master. And Srila Prabhupada was such a revolutionary that by hearing, he was able to put into graphic form, just like windows to the spiritual world. And we are the recipients. We are able to see through those windows into the spiritual world. So this was the special flavor that Prabhupada added when he printed books according to the instruction of his spiritual master. He added so many attractive, beautiful paintings. He put beautiful, attractive covers, because when you have to, when you sell in the West, when you sell something, there has to be a get-up, a marketing, because there's so much jaded by all these different, big advertisements and billboards and commercials. So Prabhupada made his books attractive even from the outside. That you look at the cover of Krishna book, and immediately you say, who is that beautiful boy and girl on the cover? You become curious. Prabhupada was such a revolutionary in that way. He took what he heard from Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati and added with his own intelligence just to attract the entire world to Krishna. He was revealing the reality, and this reality was loving service to the lotus feet of Radha and Krishna, the supremely worshipable personality of Godhead. How masterfully he spoke, and with utter conviction and boldness. Now, unfortunately, it's 6:30, and according to the schedule, we're supposed to go to Gora Arti, but Gora Arti is very packed. So if you like, I'll continue speaking. Yes? Okay, because I thought that the class was from 6 to 7. So I'll go on a little further then. It was with such awe that Abai listened with fastened attention. Of course, all Vaishnavas accepted Krishna as the worshipable Lord. But how conclusively and with what sound logic was the faith of the Vaishnavas established by this great teacher? There's a very interesting incident that I discovered while studying for this class. We know, and even Prabhupada explained in that lecture at Gorakhpur, he said that he was a very staunch follower of Gandhi before. And when he met Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati, he completely rejected the Swarajya movement and became within his heart a disciple of Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati. Well, he wasn't the only one. There were many youth who were becoming attracted to Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati by his forceful preaching. And the British were watching this, because the British, although they kept a distance from the culture and religious activities of the Indians, who they called natives, they were seeing where these natives were going to. There was Gandhi, there was Subhash Chandra Bose, all of these independent leaders. And then they noticed that now so many young men are going to hear from this Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati. Is he another radical, anti-British group? They couldn't understand what he was teaching. So they decided to send a spy. They sent a Bengali who was in the groups of the British to become one of the listeners. And he would go to hear the lectures of Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati to find out whether this was a political group or what actually, why were all these young men even leaving Gandhi and coming to join his group. So the spy was listening every night to Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati, and he became a devotee. And we had and the same thing happened in our ISKCON. The government, you read it all the time, they catch people with all this heroin and drugs and all these things. So one government officer, he was tracking someone who had brought a big shipment of drugs into India. And in order to hide himself, he stayed at our Juhu temple. And the police were watching where he was staying, where he was going. So one of the officers, he would come every day to Juhu to watch this man, where he was going. And he would sit at the Radha Rasa Bihari temple, and we had one blind devotee named Surdas. He used to sing there every day, all day, at the Radha Rasa Bihari temple. So here was this government officer watching this drug dealer, seeing where he was going, and he was listening to the bhajans, he was listening to all the classes, and he became so mesmerized by the atmosphere of the Juhu temple that he gave up his government job and became a devotee. And that was Sham Krishna Das, who later became like our vice president here. So this goes on generation after generation. Now another contentious thing was this sampradaya, because Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati, he was the 12th in the line coming from Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. But the Jati Gosais and even the Babajis, they said this is not a real sampradaya because there's no real diksha. It's just by siksha that all of these, they were unconnected by diksha, but they were coming in this line of parampara only through siksha. And that is called the Bhagavat Parampara. So we are in the line of Bhagavat Parampara, because they'll even say that Gorkishore Das Babaji, he didn't use Japamala. He never gave Diksha to anyone. The only mantra that Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati received, they have so many objections to try to cut down Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati, that he's not a genuine guru. But you have to look at the fruit of a tree. How much preaching are the Babajis doing? How much preaching are the Jati Gosais doing? Because Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, he gave predictions that my name will be heard in every town and village of the world. So who was carrying out those predictions? Bhaktivinoda Thakur, he predicted that all of the different countrymen would come together and chant the names of Jai Sachinandan. So Prabhupada, he would joke here. he had a Bengali phrase. I won't try to give the Bengali, but he would say in English, big, big monkey, big, big belly. Ceylon jumping, melancholy. He said, these big, big Babajis and sannyasis, they never leave. They say, no, I will never leave Vrindavan. And you ask them to go preach Lord Chaitanya's mission. Big, big belly, big, big monkey, big, big belly, Ceylon jumping. Preach, go out and preach. Melancholy. No, they can't do it. So Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati, he did it. And he did it because of his universal vision. And this is what Srila Prabhupada learned from him. Now the relationships seem more tangible. He treasured his original impression of Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati, the saintly person who had spoken to him on the rooftop in Calcutta. But tonight that single impression had sustained him for years, that had sustained him for years in Allahabad, had been enriched and filled with new life. His spiritual master and the impression of his words were as much a reality as the stars in the sky and the moon over Vrindavan. That impression of hearing from Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati was filling him with its reality, and all other reality was forming itself around the absolute reality of Srila Gurudev, just as all the planets circle around the sun. Now, again, Prabhupada, we'll go back to that important lecture that Prabhupada gave in Gorakhpur when he was describing intimately his relationship with Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati. He said, you know, when the spiritual master is present, we say, Jai Om Vishnupad Paramahansa Paribrajacharya Astu Tarasata Shishimad. Paramahansa and Paribrajacharya, because he's a Paramahansa who's traveling and preaching. And then, program? Either? Yeah, Krishna Hall में. अच्छा, वो बंद करे. कौन फ्लैश दे रहे? Who is giving class? Gopi Gita. You want me to stop class for the...
5 minutes.
Okay, fine. Okay. So, when the spiritual master enters samadhi, we change that to Nitya Lila Pravishta, Asto Tarasata, because he's not Paribrajacharya anymore, he's Nitya Lila Pravishta, he's entered into the Nitya Lila, his eternal pastimes. So Prabhupada, just as Satsrup Maharaj is explaining here, just as all the planets circle around the sun. So Prabhupada said that his spiritual master and all the pure devotees, they appear here. They're coming from the spiritual world. They have their eternal relationship with Krishna already. They know their eternal relationship. In our Gaudiya Vaishnava Sangha, mostly everyone aspires for Manjari Bhav, some are in Sakya Bhav. So Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati, he was sent here on a mission by the Supreme Lord. And Prabhupada says, just like the sun, we, according to our vision, we see the sun rise in the morning and rise into the sky, and then in the evening time disappear. So the pure devotee, he is just like that. He's just like the sun. We see his pastimes for some time while he's on the planet with us, and then he enters into his Nitya Lila again, and he goes on another mission given to him by the Supreme Lord. So this is a beautiful description of Srila Prabhupada, of his spiritual master, how he is an eternal associate of the Lord, who came here on a mission from the spiritual world for some time, and then he left to continue that mission in another place. The next morning, Abai was up with the others more than an hour before dawn, bathed and chanting mantras in the congregation. Later in the morning, the tall, stately figure of Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati, dressed in plain saffron, got into the back seat of a car and rode away from the camp. Thoughtful and grave, he looked back and waved, accepting the loving farewell gestures of his followers. Abai stood among them. So Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati, from here, he again continued his traveling to enthuse the devotees that he had sent to open up mutts in Kurukshetra, in different parts of UP, and then in Dhaka, and then back to Calcutta, constantly traveling. So this year of the Brajmandal Parikrama that Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati initiated, which he only did for 1 year, he also came back to Vrindavan and Mathura years after this, a few years, and he would perform Urja Vrat. So what is this Urja Vrat? Guru Das, he asked Prabhupada that we hear about Urja Vrat. It's recommended by Rupa Goswami that we perform it during the month of Kartik. So Guru Das asked Prabhupada, what is Urja Vrat? And Prabhupada said, no eating, no sleeping, just Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare. Can you do it? And Guru Das says, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. So this is what, after this big Brajmandal Parikrama, he came back with small groups of devotees to perform this Urja Vrat in Mathura, and at that time he discovered the place where Rupa Goswami had darshan of the Gopal deity when he was brought to Mathura, and he had it at Radhakund, and it was at that time that he established the Kunja Bihari temple there and the Pushpa Samadhi of Bhaktivinoda Thakur. So though he didn't have any more Brajmandal Parikramas, he did come back to Vrindavan for Urja Vrat. And we can all try to perform this Urja Vrat in Kartik also. So they've asked me to stop now. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna.